A billionaire never believed in love until discovers he has a 7-year-old son. "Dad already left me. Don't take me." The boy's scream pierced through the crowded airport, echoing like a wound no one could see. In that instant, Ethan Monroe, a billionaire who had sworn never to believe in love again, froze as if facing his own broken childhood in the eyes of a stranger's son. Rain hammered against the glass. The city lights flickered in the distance, and power met fragility in the most unexpected place. What would you have done in his place? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please, subscribe to Emotional Echoes channel. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you their story. Ethan Monroe had walked through airports more times than he could count. Yet tonight something pulled at him in a way he could not explain. He was moving through the terminal with the usual distance of a man who never slowed down, when he noticed a small figure curled against the wall near the gate. The boy's hands clamped over his ears, his body trembling, as if the world around him was crashing too loudly to survive. The overhead announcements thundered across the hall. Suitcases rolled, footsteps echoed, voices overlapped. Each sound seemed to press harder against the child until he rocked back and forth, his face pale with panic. Ethan froze. He remembered being that boy once, not in an airport, but in a crowded train station, when his father left him on a bench to chase after a deal. The noise had swallowed him whole, the world too big, too loud, and he had sat with his hands over his ears, waiting for someone who never came back on time. A security guard crouched, asking the boy questions, his tone sharp, official. The child flinched, his head jerking up, and his voice broke into a scream that sliced through the air. "Dad already left me. Don't take me." The words cracked open something Ethan thought was long buried. It was not just the fear in the boy's voice. It was the certainty of abandonment, the raw wound of being unwanted. For a moment, Ethan could not breathe. His chest ached as he saw his own 7-year-old self staring back at him through those wide, terrified eyes. The resemblance was uncanny, not just in the curve of the face, but in the helplessness carved into every line. He was a man who had spent years building an empire, so no one could ever make him feel small again. Yet one trembling child had shattered that armor in seconds. He could have turned away. He could have told himself it was none of his concern. But as the boy's body shook against the cold floor, Ethan felt the echo of his own childhood loneliness claw at him. It was the beginning of a connection he had never asked for, and deep down, he knew he would not be able to walk away. Through the blur of rushing travelers, she appeared. Hannah's breath came fast as she pushed through the crowd, her eyes locked on the small boy trembling on the floor. She dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms, before the guard could speak again. Liam buried his face against her chest, his cries breaking into short gasps as she whispered apology after apology, her voice shaking but steady enough to wrap around him like a shield. Her arms trembled, but the way she held him was unyielding, as if nothing in the world could pry him away. Ethan found himself staring, caught off guard by the fire in her exhaustion. For a moment, he did not see the pale skin or the dark circles under her eyes. He saw only the fierce outline of a mother willing to fight the entire world for her child. And then recognition struck. He knew her. Years ago, she had worn the uniform of his airline, moving through aisles with a calm grace that made nervous passengers relax. He remembered her smile, professional but kind, the way she leaned down to reassure a child on a turbulent flight. Back then, she had seemed untouchable, a small part of a world he controlled from above, yet separate from his own. Now she looked nothing like that memory. Her hair was pulled back in a rush, her clothes faded, her shoulders heavy with strain. Still, there was something in her that had not changed, a quiet dignity, even under the weight of struggle. Ethan felt a strange twist in his chest. He had seen her in polished moments, yet this raw version of her left him more unsettled. Hannah lifted her head, and for the first time her eyes met his. Recognition flickered there too, but it was cautious, almost guarded. She gave him the smallest nod, not of greeting but of acknowledgement, before turning back to comfort her son. Ethan stood silent, unsure why the sight of her pulled at him. Perhaps it was the memory of who she had been, colliding with the woman she had become. Or perhaps it was the realization that even stripped of everything, she still carried more strength than most people he knew. Before the world called him a billionaire, Ethan was just a young man with nothing but stubborn dreams. At 22, he worked long shifts, pouring concrete, saving every dollar in the hope of building a future with the woman he loved. She had been his whole world, filling his nights with promises that felt like forever. He remembered the ring he bought, simple and modest, his hands trembling when he placed it in her palm. For a second, he thought he saw tears in her eyes, but then she laughed. The sound was sharp, cruel, cutting deeper than any blade. "Love is for fools. You'll never be enough." Those words carved themselves into him. She left that night with a man whose family name was worth more than Ethan's entire existence. He never saw her again, but he carried the echo of her heels walking away like a curse. In that moment, he learned what power meant and what weakness cost. From then on, he built walls high enough to keep out anyone who might hurt him. He buried tenderness under contracts, hid longing beneath ambition. Relationships became shallow, measured, controlled, never allowed to last. If love was a game, he had already lost, and he swore he would never play again. Yet watching Hannah hold her son at the airport, Ethan felt something stir that he had locked away for decades. It was the same ache from that night, but turned inside out. Not the pain of being abandoned, but the fear of watching someone else carry that same wound. Ethan could not shake the boy's face from his mind. For nights he lay awake, hearing the echo of Liam's cry that his father had left him. Something in those words gnawed at him with a force he could not ignore. He told himself it was only coincidence, but the resemblance in the boy's eyes refused to let him rest. Finally, he called his most trusted investigators. He wanted the truth, even if he feared what it might reveal. The report arrived in a plain envelope. At first, the details felt ordinary. Hannah Carter, 34, former flight attendant, single mother, no record of marriage. He turned the pages with detached calm, until one word stopped him cold. Fertility clinic. Ethan's pulse spiked. He read slower now, each line heavier than the last. 7 years ago, Hannah had undergone in vitro fertilization. The donor had been anonymous. His breath caught. Buried memories rushed back. In his late 20s, a friend in the medical field had convinced him to participate in a genetic research program. It was pitched as something routine, almost meaningless. A clipboard, a few forms, a sterile room. He had signed without thinking, certain it was a forgettable detail in a life that was already racing ahead. He never once believed anything real would come of it. Yet here it was, in black ink. The sealed files confirmed the donor was Ethan Monroe. Liam Carter, the boy who trembled on the airport floor, was his biological son. For a moment, the room spun, and he pressed the papers against the desk, as if holding them still could stop his world from collapsing. He whispered the words out loud, testing their weight. "I have a son." The sound was both miraculous and unbearable. A son who carried his blood, his gestures, even the same haunted look in his eyes. And Ethan had missed everything. The first cries, the first steps, the nights Hannah stayed awake alone, rocking the child who should have known his father's arms. A sharp ache tore through his chest. He remembered Liam's voice at the airport, begging not to be taken, certain his father had abandoned him. Ethan had not left him, but in a cruel way, he had. He had lived in penthouses and boardrooms while his son grew up without even knowing his name. That absence was written in the boy's fear, carved into every tremor of his hands. The irony was merciless. The choice Ethan once dismissed as a trivial donation, something he thought carried no weight, had created the very life now standing before him. Fate had mocked his arrogance, turning what he considered meaningless into the most meaningful truth of all. He sank back in his chair, staring at nothing. Wealth had always made him feel untouchable, but this truth cut deeper than betrayal, deeper than loss. For the first time in decades, he felt powerless. No amount of money could rewrite the years already gone. No empire could erase the hollow where a father should have been. Hannah once wore a uniform that carried her across continents, smiling at strangers 30,000 feet above the ground. But after Liam was born, her wings were clipped. She traded layovers for sleepless nights, flight schedules for therapy appointments. The savings she had were poured into a tiny home kitchen, turning meals into hope that maybe neighbors would come. Maybe they would keep her afloat. Most days, the phone stayed silent. The smell of food filled the house, but the chairs stayed empty. Bills piled up like shadows in every corner. Hannah pushed herself harder, yet the weight never lightened. Liam's diagnosis only deepened the cracks. Teachers called him difficult. Some parents whispered at the school gates that he was the strange boy no one wanted their child sitting beside. One even said loud enough for her to hear, maybe if his father hadn't left, he wouldn't be so broken. Those words cut like glass, but the cruelest came from people who barely knew her. At the grocery store, two women sneered behind her back. She couldn't keep a man, so she bought herself a baby. On the street, a man she once called a friend muttered, "Poor kid, born to a mother desperate enough to pay for love." Hannah kept walking, but each step felt heavier. Each whisper pressed like a stone against her chest. She turned to lenders when the therapy bills became impossible. At first they smiled, promising help, but their smiles faded quickly. Payments doubled, threats followed. They reminded her with every knock at the door that she owed more than money. She owed them her peace, her dignity. Yet every night, when the house grew quiet, Hannah sat on the floor beside Liam as he lined up his toy cars. He rarely spoke, but when he leaned against her shoulder, just for a second, it was enough to silence every cruel voice outside. The world mocked her, debts hunted her, but she refused to break. For him, she would endure it all. Ethan went to her house without announcing himself, driven by a need he could no longer ignore. The small sign for Hannah's kitchen business hung by the door, faded from weather. Inside, he found her stirring a pot, while Liam crouched on the floor, rocking back and forth, with his hands pressed tight to his ears. She whispered soft words, trying to calm him while the food boiled behind her. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen, unsure if he had the right to step further. Then Hannah glanced up, eyes sharp, body tense, as if ready to defend her son from anyone. He spoke gently, saying he wanted to help, that he could cover Liam's therapy, even clear her debts. The offer came from guilt, but also from a deep pull he did not yet understand. Hannah shook her head before he even finished. She wiped her hands on her apron, voice steady but firm. She said she had not chosen this path to trap anyone, and she would not let money rewrite her choices. She told him she chose IVF because she wanted to be a mother, not because she was waiting for someone to save her. Her words struck harder than rejection. They carried dignity, the kind that no wealth could buy. Ethan saw in her a strength he had never known in boardrooms or private jets. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes, but her spirit burned with a fire that humbled him. Liam let out a small cry, and Hannah dropped everything to hold him. Ethan watched how quickly she gave herself without hesitation. He realized she had carried every burden alone, yet her love had never wavered. He had come to offer money, but what she gave her son was something he had never been able to give anyone. Ethan left that day with nothing agreed upon, no debt paid, no therapy booked. But he walked away with a seed of respect planted deep inside him. For the first time in years, he felt admiration for another soul, not because of power or success, but because of the unshakable courage of a mother who refused to bow. They came at dusk, three men whose shadows filled the doorway before their voices did. Hannah froze with a dish in her hand as they pushed inside, their words sharp, demanding money she did not have. Liam's toys scattered as he scrambled into a corner, his small hands already pressed tight against his ears. Hannah tried to reason, her voice trembling but steady enough to shield her son. She begged for more time, but one man laughed and struck her across the face. The sound cracked through the room. Liam let out a scream so piercing it rattled the windows. She staggered, one hand to her cheek, but still moved in front of her boy, spreading her arms wide like a barrier of flesh and bone. Her heart pounded with the certainty that no one was coming. She had always been alone in these moments, and tonight would be no different. When the tallest man raised his fist again, Hannah braced herself. Then the door slammed open. Ethan stood there, his frame filling the entrance, his eyes dark with fury. For a split second, Hannah's heart twisted with disbelief. She thought he would turn away, like everyone else had, that the billionaire would vanish into the safety of his world. Instead, he crossed the room in a single stride and stepped in front of her. The punch landed on him, splitting his lip, but he did not move. Blood ran down his chin, yet his shoulders stayed squared, his body unshaken. Hannah gasped, staring at the man she once believed incapable of bleeding for anyone. The men cursed, shouting at him to step aside, but Ethan's roar shook the air. "You'll have to kill me before you touch them again." His voice carried something primal, not the polished command of a CEO, but the raw fury of a man who had finally found what he could not lose. One of the men shoved him hard, but Ethan pushed back, his eyes locked, daring them to try again. Hannah clutched Liam tighter, her tears blurring the scene. In her chest burned the shocking realization that he was not leaving. He was standing there, bleeding, defiant, unmovable. The intruders faltered, their threats loud, but their steps backing toward the door. They muttered warnings of unfinished business, but none of them dared to strike again. Finally, the door slammed shut behind them, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed on the walls. Ethan stood there a moment longer, his chest heaving, blood staining his collar. He did not turn to Hannah right away, as if still anchoring himself between danger and the people behind him. When he finally faced her, she saw something she never expected. Not arrogance, not pity, but a man stripped of distance, willing to take every blow meant for her. For years, Hannah had carried the weight alone, convinced no one would ever stand beside her. Yet tonight, someone had. The disbelief left her speechless, her swollen cheek wet with tears. Liam, still pressed to her chest, had gone quiet, as if even he sensed the change. And in that moment, Hannah no longer saw Ethan as a stranger from another world. She saw the man who had bled for her son, and that was the first time she believed he might stay. By morning, the story was everywhere. Photos of Ethan, leaving Hannah's small house, his shirt stained with blood, were splashed across tabloids. The headlines screamed betrayal. Billionaire hides secret love child. Some went further, dragging Hannah into the dirt. Former flight attendant turns gold digger, manipulated a CEO through his son. Hannah's face was plastered on television screens, caught in moments she never agreed to, holding Liam in the schoolyard, looking tired outside the grocery store. Every image was twisted into proof. Talk shows mocked her clothes, her kitchen business, even the way she held her son. They called her desperate, manipulative, a woman who had trapped a powerful man with a child she could never support alone. Richard Hale fanned the flames. At a board meeting leaked to the press, he slammed documents onto the table, declaring Ethan unfit to lead. He pointed at a photo of Hannah clutching Liam and sneered, "This is what he hides from shareholders, a scandal that makes a mockery of our empire." His voice carried across news stations by evening, his words framed as the truth. For Hannah, the storm was unbearable. Reporters camped outside her house, shoving microphones in her face, asking how much money she wanted from Ethan. Neighbors who once bought her food now turned away, whispering behind closed doors. She sat at her kitchen table with her hands over her face, whispering that she had never wanted fame, never wanted this. All she had ever wanted was to be a mother. Liam watched silently, confused by the chaos. His small hands lined up toy cars while his mother shook beside him. When one reporter shouted that she was a fraud, Hannah broke down, her shoulders shaking. Ethan entered then, his eyes dark as he saw her crumbling. He placed a hand on her shoulder, pulling her gently against him. "The world is cruel," he whispered, but I will not let it crush you again." His words were steady, not loud, but they cut through the noise around them. Hannah, too tired to argue, let herself lean into him for the first time. And in that fragile silence, Ethan knew the fight was no longer about shareholders or headlines. It was about protecting her and the boy who had carried his blood without his name. Ethan started showing up quietly, not as the billionaire in tailored suits, but as a man trying to learn how to be present. He sat on the floor with Liam, building Lego towers that collapsed again and again. At first, Liam ignored him, lining up the pieces in his own way. But Ethan stayed patient, never correcting, just joining in at the edges until the boy allowed him closer. He learned the small things mattered, speaking softly when Liam covered his ears, giving space when his hands shook, waiting until the boy chose to share a glance. Each moment was fragile, but Ethan treated it like treasure. Hannah watched from the doorway, surprised at the tenderness in a man she once thought incapable of it. Nights were the hardest. Liam often woke in panic, his cries echoing in the small house. Ethan came when Hannah was too tired to stand, sitting beside the bed, whispering steady words, letting the boy hold his finger until sleep returned. There was no miracle, no sudden cure, only repetition, patience, and a quiet presence that began to soften the edges of fear. Then one night, as Ethan helped Liam fit 2 Lego pieces together, the boy looked up. His eyes met Ethan's for longer than a second. His lips moved, almost hesitant, and a single word slipped out. "Dad." The sound was small, but it carried the weight of everything Ethan thought he had lost forever. Ethan's chest cracked open. Tears blurred his vision, spilling faster than he could stop them. He pulled the boy into his arms, trembling, whispering back that he was here now. From the kitchen, Hannah stood frozen, her hand over her mouth, tears falling silently. She had never seen him break, never seen him stripped of all his armor, and in that moment, she believed him. Love did not bloom from grand gestures or promises. It came from the sight of a man on the floor, building blocks, whispering through the dark, refusing to give up. It was not fast, but it was real. And for the first time, Hannah felt she was no longer raising her son alone. A year passed quietly, not with miracles, but with steady change. Hannah's small kitchen dream had grown into a string of cozy diners, each one filled with laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals. Liam walked through the school gates with a backpack, no longer shrinking from the world, but waving at friends who waited for him. Ethan was still a CEO, still signing contracts and leading meetings, but something in him had shifted. His calendar no longer ruled his life. He was the father who learned how to braid shoelaces, the man who waited outside therapy sessions, the one who sat in the audience of a school play and clapped until his hands ached. Power, once his shield, had become his way of protecting the 2 people who mattered most. Hannah had softened too. The lines of strain on her face eased, replaced by a quiet glow of relief. She still carried herself with independence, still stood firmly on her own. But now there was someone walking beside her, not to rescue, not to take over, but simply to share the weight she had carried alone for so long. The airport was as busy as ever, buzzing with voices, rolling suitcases, and hurried announcements. Yet for Ethan, it felt different now. He walked through the same terminal that once mirrored his loneliness, but this time Liam was in his arms, his small head resting trustfully against his shoulder. Hannah walked beside him, her smile soft, and for the first time the place felt like where it all began, not where he had been broken. He stopped by the wide glass windows overlooking the runway. Planes rumbled in the distance, but the noise no longer felt empty. He looked down at Liam, then at Hannah, and his voice came quiet, almost like a confession. "I spent years trying to shut love out. I thought if I built high enough walls, nothing could hurt me again. But you too. You didn't knock, you just walked right in. And I don't ever want to live behind those walls again." Liam stirred and wrapped his arms around Ethan's neck, as if sealing the promise without words. Hannah's eyes glistened, her hand reaching to rest gently on his arm. She didn't need to say anything. The look she gave him said enough that she believed him. that she was ready to trust the man who had once been only a stranger at an airport. The three of them stood there, framed by the hum of departing planes, a family not defined by perfection, but by choice. Ethan no longer saw love as a wound or a weakness. Hannah no longer carried the weight alone, and Liam, no longer trembling in corners, knew safety in the arms of both. In that moment, the future stretched open before them, not empty, not frightening, but full of hope. The kind of hope that felt ordinary and extraordinary at once, the kind that could last a lifetime. From a lost boy's cry in the airport to the moment a broken billionaire found his heart again, this journey showed us how pain can turn into healing when love is given a second chance. It reminds us that true family is not about wealth or perfection, but about presence, compassion, and courage to stay. Stories like this echo far beyond one man, one woman, or one child. They speak to the humanity we all share. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. Subscribe, like, and share emotional echoes so more hearts can feel these truths. Thanks for listening.